Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for today's program. We're going to talk more about, as we wind down this year of 2020, it's been one of the most unique times, one of the most unique years that any of us have ever seen before. It's truly been amazing, everything that's been packed into this year. The 2020 year. It's been dizzying, it's been confusing, it's been unbelievable, actually. If you could have scripted this and said, oh, there's going to be this worldwide epidemic virus that goes all over the world and kills thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, this worldwide pandemic virus is going to shut down entire economies. The nations of the world are going to come to a grinding halt for not just weeks, but actually months, and then they'll come out of it, and then they'll go back into the economic shutdowns and stay-at-home orders and so on and so forth. You could not script a science fiction movie this way. Its truth is stranger than fiction for sure. And then on top of that, you had the rioting that occurred in the streets, the burning and looting, and this so-called racial justice movement came to the forefront in our nations. And you had the Black Lives Matter, Antifa marches, and calls for defunding of the police. Just crazy, idiotic, stupid, foolish ideas that no one in their rational mind would ever come up with. But during this year, during the craziness of this year, all of these things have come to light. And then finally, we have this election, presidential election, November 3rd election debacle that has just thrown the nation into more and more chaos because of the corruption and fraud, where you had these entire democratically controlled cities essentially take over the entire election process, essentially say, we own this election, we are going to bring in our own poll workers, we are going to make our own rules, we are going to change our laws at the last moment, and we are going to rig this thing so that our candidate wins, hands down, no question. And they actually did that in a number of our major cities where Democrats are in control. The key swing states, they did that in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They did that in Detroit, Michigan. They did that in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They did that in Atlanta, Georgia. They did that in Las Vegas, Nevada. They did that in Arizona. They actually pulled it off. They actually were able to manipulate the laws and rig the rules and call in all their own workers and exclude all Republican conservative observers. And they were able to hijack and hijinks an entire presidential election. And we're still in the midst of that. We don't actually know how that's going to be resolved. And this year has been one of, if there was one word that I would be able to describe this year, and that is chaos. If there was another word that more or less summed up the year, it would be also confusion. So confusion and chaos were basically the twin concepts of this year, and we're not over it yet. We're not out of the 2020 year. So, and it probably won't end after the new year. It will probably continue because this is something that has been brewing for a long time. The divisions in our society, the division between the old Judeo-Christian worldview that was basically the operating system of our civilization, especially in the United States, but also coming from Europe and England, and we saw the Judeo-Christian tradition flower in Europe for just century after century. It was transmitted over to North America, and we saw the Christian worldview, the That worldview now that has been the operating system for our society for decades and centuries is now under assault. It is flat out under attack. We are being attacked. This is not a foreign army like we saw in Germany during World War II, where the Germans would come in and invade a nation. This is not a physical army. This is a spiritual and intellectual army. This is a coup of a different sort. This is a takeover attempt by radical secular humanists to essentially take over the culture and redefine morality, redefine spirituality, redefine truth, and redefine basically everything. For example, we're seeing increasing pressure on everyday citizens, Christian and non-Christian alike, to redefine what it means to be a man and redefine what it means to be a woman. Redefine the categories of male and redefine the categories of female. Now, we've already seen a redefinition of the essential foundational institution of marriage, because who would have thought that in the 21st century, the United States and the nations of the Western world would have redefined the very core definition of marriage. For decades and centuries and millennia, the definition of marriage has been the joining of a man and a woman, male and female, to form a family unit, have children, raise children, stable family. Marriage, man, woman. That's the basic definition of marriage. And it comes from the Bible, but it also comes from just simply humans being humans, made in the image of God. That's the natural configuration. And no societies have questioned that. But today, in our so-called enlightened era, our so-called educated era, think about this. We are the most highly educated generation that has ever existed on the planet Earth, and yet we are the stupidest. We are the most foolish. We're the ones that make the dumbest mistakes, but yet we look back and judge those who have no college education or don't have all of the high-tech gadgetry we have, smartphones. You can look up any question that you want, just Google it on your smartphone wherever you are. You have this resource right there in your hand that can basically give you information that in just 50 years ago would have taken weeks or months or even years to gather. And now we have access to all this information, yet we're dumber and stupider and more foolish than any previous generation. And that's because we are being overrun by a secular humanist worldview. Now, a lot of you are not familiar with this idea. You just go about your life and you're not even familiar with the concept of a secular humanist worldview. What is a secular humanist worldview? First of all, the secular humanist worldview believes that when you go back and back and back and back and back in the universe, the formation of the planets and the stars and life on planet Earth, you go back far enough, the only thing you'll ever find is just some impersonal, random force, material energy swirling about, colliding, running into each other, exploding, gases exploding, matter flying all over the place, chaos. Basically, that's what you get if you go far enough back. Now, that is totally 180 degrees away from the Judeo-Christian worldview, which teaches from the Bible that if you go back far enough, back far back behind creation, you come to a loving, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present God. So Christianity teaches that behind everything is a loving, benevolent, kind, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present God. God, personal God, is behind everything. The secular worldview, secular humanist worldview, teaches that behind everything, when you get it to the very bottom of everything, it's just impersonal material energy, chaos, explosion, chance. That's all. And believe me, the difference that the two worldviews make when you work out all the implications is dramatic. And so that's what we see in society today. We have this move to challenge the understanding of the very nature of humanity. Is humanity made in the image of God, like the Judeo-Christian worldview teaches? Or what we're being challenged, what's under attack is the image of God, and what is being forced upon us right now by these secular humanist radicals, often disguising themselves as liberal Democrats. What we're being attacked on is they're saying that no, there is no image of God. There is no fixed nature. A man is not a fixed entity called male. A woman is not a fixed entity called a female. They're trying to say that these are simply categories that we humans have labeled people, more or less, but they're trying to teach us that you can change your gender. You can even change your sex. You can, if you're a woman, if you don't like that, you can become a man. And if you're a man, you can become a woman. And they're trying to confuse the very nature of humanity. They're questioning the image of God, the Imago Dei, in the biblical teaching that comes from the early chapters of Genesis. They're trying to challenge that and say, oh, that's wrong, that's wrong. And they're trying to question all of that. And there's a very real battle going on in society today. If you ever wonder what is going on in the United States, for example, in this cultural war, well, this is it. Two worldviews are fighting it out. This is to the point where we haven't actually seen a whole lot of violence, an actual shooting civil war yet, like we saw in the 1800s between the North and the South. That was a real violent shooting civil war where thousands of people died as a result of an actual armed conflict. We haven't seen that as much directly. There's been some Antifa riots, and there's been some deaths in the streets, and there's been some shootings. And yes, those deaths and those shootings were connected to a culture battle. But for the most part, we have not seen an actual violent shooting civil war yet. But we've seen everything else. And even in this election here, where you have massive evidence of voter fraud, massive evidence of the law being broken, blatantly broken, openly broken, where you have one party, the Liberal Democrat Party, actually rigging an election by any means possible to drive out the current president. And why do they want the current president driven out of office? They want it out of office because he represents the old Judeo-Christian worldview, more or less. If you were to go back to the Founding Fathers, you would see that not all of the Founding Fathers were actually Christians, but they all operated out of a basic Judeo-Christian worldview. They all had assumptions that come from the Christian heritage of Europe, that ultimately come from the Christian heritage of the Middle East, because that's where Christianity came from, in the land of promise, the land of Israel. And Jesus lived, born, and died, and rose again in that part of the world. And then that message, that gospel, the Christian faith spread all over the world, spread to Europe. It took hold in Europe. And we in the United States get our Judeo-Christian tradition from the Judeo-Christian tradition of Europe. And we have operated under the Judeo-Christian assumptions and presuppositions and moral values and outlook on life, outlook on the future, the definition of what is the destiny of men and women, the nature of the family, the nature of marriage, the value of human life. Some people look at, for example, the abortion issue. They see it as just some political issue. But if you look at it from a cultural war perspective, if you look at it from the perspective of the Judeo-Christian tradition against a secular humanist tradition, you will realize that it's not just a cultural war, a petty political issue. It is actually something that has to be a conflict, because the secular humanist worldview believes that men and women are simply higher animals. If you look at your dog, for example, you may love your dog, but when your dog gets to the end of his life, a lot of people, rather than see that animal suffer in the latter days, they take it to the animal hospital and they euthanize it. They put it to death. They kill it. And we don't do that with people. Why? Because people are made in the image of God. People are special. They have a unique position in the world, whereas animals, cats, dogs, mice, goldfish, parakeets, even large animals in Africa like elephants and giraffes and all, they're not made in the image of God. They are not made by God to fulfill a special and unique calling on this earth the way humans are. And so we are special. We are different, categorically different from the lower animals. But the secular humanist worldview doesn't believe that we are qualitatively different. They believe that, yes, we're smarter, and yes, we are more cultured, and that we have developed higher. But as far as our nature and as far as our unique position in the world, we are just the same as the animals. We're just creatures that evolved, they believe, through the millions and millions of years of natural development. We were not created for anything special, no purpose. We were just accidentally, you might say, or incidentally created out of the process of natural evolution. They're really strong on the evolution from some tiny pond millions and billions of years ago through the slime, creating fish, taking to the land as amphibians, and then amphibians turning into mammals, and then mammals turning into primates, and then man is just a higher primate, and so no different from the lower animals that preceded him. That's the secular humanist worldview. So you can see then why there would be no problem with abortion. And you look at the liberal Democrats, they are totally 100% in favor of legalized abortion. In fact, they want taxpayer-funded money to pay for abortions. And they have no problem with abortion. They have no problem with a doctor crushing the skull of an innocent child in its mother's womb and then snipping its head off and pulling its body parts off. They have no problem with that. They have no problem with abortion providers like Planned Parenthood selling dead baby body parts for profit. They have no problem with that. Why? Because human nature is just like any other creature on this earth, just like a bug, just like a flea, just like a tick, just like a rat. We're just animals, and we're just a little more highly developed, and we've done a lot of advanced things in our time on this planet, but at core, we're just like any other animal. And so abortion is not a big problem for liberal Democrats because they are pushing the secular humanist worldview. Well, if you're a Judeo-Christian citizen in this country, you're a Christian, you believe in the Bible, you believe that men and women are special, they were created for God for a special purpose, and that the Spirit of God can dwell in them, then you respect human life at every stage of development, and you will not abide by abortion. In fact, you will oppose abortion. And so you will put forth candidates who oppose abortion. And the current president of the United States opposes abortion. And so in this last election, one of the biggest issues was that the Democrat liberal candidate is all in on abortion. And the more conservative Republican candidate opposes abortion. I happen to be, and I've said this many times over the year, that I was in Washington, D.C. on January 25th or so of this year, where the president spoke at the March for Life rally and said, I am with you. I will oppose abortion, and I will appoint justices to end Roe v. Wade and so forth. Totally solidly Christian in his policy position on abortion. And so that's why the Bible-believing evangelical Christians of the United States overwhelmingly voted for a second term for the president. And that's why people who oppose our president had so much animosity toward him, because he was challenging the abortion right, so-called abortion right, of a woman to kill her own baby in the womb. And they don't have a problem because, again, human beings are just animals, and the baby in the womb is just like a fish swimming around in the amniotic fluid. And so they have no respect. It's also the same way that the Democratic liberal candidate was all in favor of transgenderism. In fact, in one of the question and answer periods, he was asked about an 8-year-old boy who wanted to begin to take chemicals to transform himself into a girl. And he said, that's fine. I'm all in favor of that little 8-year-old boy wanting to become a girl. That's totally up to his own right. He has a right to do that. In other words, a major political candidate for president, a liberal Democrat, was promoting the idea that 8-year-old children should be able to decide if they'd like to start chemicals to try to decrease their maleness and increase chemistry that would try to promote any kind of feminine characteristics in them so that they could fully transition into the opposite sex. This is crazy. This is insane. And that's why Christians opposed that candidate. Now, we've had chaos in our society this year, also because during this cultural war that's taking place, this attempted coup by the secular humanist forces, the liberal Democrat forces, they have also tried to push a view of government that is anti-biblical. We've seen this push for a big socialist-style government where the government basically controls every aspect of society. And so you have, during this pandemic, you have these blue state Democratic liberal governors and mayors and state officials with a heavy hand trying to lock people down, shut down their business, and make them dependent on the state so that they can control us and control all of us. And so it's natural that Christians would say, no, we're not going to submit to this idol government, this godlike government that wants to control every aspect of our life. We follow God. We serve God and God alone. They want to shut down our churches. They want to stop us from going to worship on Sunday morning. They want to shut down everything so that they can then dole out permissions or dole out rights with their heavy hand to try to control us, to control every aspect of society. And as Christians, we say, no, this is illegitimate, this is evil, this is sinful, and we will not stand for it. And so we resist it. And then finally, you look at the elections of 2020, you look at all of the fraud that took place, the lying and the cheating, and the censorship that's occurring right now during the mainstream media coverage of it, and the big tech companies of Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Google, they're trying to censor out all Judeo-Christian values and views, and they're trying to promote the secular humanist worldviews. And you ask yourself, how could Americans participate in a cheating, lying, fraud, stolen elections? How could good Americans do that? Even if they are liberal Democrats, how could they participate in that? And how could they take the attitude that win at all cost and the end justifies the means. How could they do that? Well, again, it comes down to the worldview. If you're a secular humanist and you believe there is no God, and you believe that evolution is the explanation as why everything is the way it's at, and you don't believe that there's any ultimate right or wrong because there's no higher standard above humanity, then the issues of truth and lies, good and bad, those are all just blended together. And one moment you can have something that you call truth, and then the next moment that same thing can be called false. It's whatever you need to get power. And it boils down to a power play by the liberal Democrats to take power, to seize power, and they'll do it in the United States, and they will do it all around the world. Now, in the United States, during the year 2020, there was a pandemic that came through. We're still under that, and they've used that as an excuse to seize power. Why? To impose a secular humanist worldview on this country. And if they're successful here, then they will use another issue worldwide called climate change to seize power, to seize government control in all the nations of the world in order to impose rules and laws and restrictions on everything. Churches, religion, businesses, organizations, whatever they want to do, they will use any crisis to achieve their ends. Why? Because there is no right and wrong. There is no truth and false. It's only whatever helps them achieve whatever they want to do. And this is exactly what socialist, atheist societies have done classically. If we look back to the Russian Revolution, the Soviet Communist Revolution, they would have a law one year and swear up and down that that was the truth. And then the next year they would totally change it because the party goals changed, and they would call that law now evil and false, and they would discredit it. They would do that with people too. One year there would be a politician who everyone is supposed to essentially almost worship, and then the next year that candidate was out of favor and would be totally erased. The propaganda would basically ignore that person as if they never existed. And this is how totalitarian socialist and communist nations work, and it's being done here in the United States already. So this is why we're going through such a confusing time today. As Christians, we need to resist this secular, humanistic, liberal, democratic, soft coup, this soft takeover, this soft revolution that's trying to impose itself on us. And we need to stand strong and say, nope, we are not going to fall for that. We're not going to fall for the lies. We're not going to fall for the censorship. We're not going to allow the election to be stolen from the president. We're not going to allow the mainstream media to basically lie to us and twist things and distort things. We're going to resist, and we're going to push and promote the Word of God, the Judeo-Christian worldview. We're going to fight for it, and we're going to resist the secular humanist lies, and we're going to promote the truth of God in the process. So hang on, brace yourself. We're in for some tough times ahead, but with God, we can prevail. God bless. We'll see you back next week on another edition of the program.